A single dad barista made a heart in a rich girl's coffee, but when her powerful father's shocking offer the next day tried to break him, a hidden battle between love, pride, and class begins. Can a heart drawn in foam survive when the whole world wants it erased? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the worn wooden floor of Carter's coffee shop. Steam rose from the gleaming espresso machine, dancing in the early light while the rich aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air. Ethan Carter wiped down the counter for the third time that morning, his movements precise and practiced. The shop was quiet, except for the soft scratching of crayons coming from the corner table where his daughter Lily Saturday. "Daddy, look." Lily held up her drawing, a rainbow-colored masterpiece featuring what looked like a cat riding a unicorn. "Do you think we could get a cat someday?" Ethan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. And maybe someday about the cat. But remember what we talked about?" Lily's shoulders slumped slightly. "The apartment's too small right now." "That's right. But hey, your drawing skills are getting better every day." He reached over to ruffle her dark curls, so much like her mother's had been. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Ethan's attention away. A young woman stepped inside, bringing with her a breath of crisp autumn air. Her cream-colored coat and perfectly styled hair spoke of money, but there was something approachable in her warm brown eyes as they took in the cozy interior of the shop. Ethan straightened up, noticing how Lily had gone suddenly quiet, watching the newcomer with curious eyes. "Good morning," he called out. "Welcome to Carter's." The woman smiled, and something in the room seemed to brighten. "Good morning. This is my first time here. I just moved back to town." She approached the counter, glancing up at the chalkboard menu. "Everything smells wonderful." "Thank you. What can I get for you today?" She tilted her head, studying the menu. "I think a cappuccino? It's been one of those mornings that needs something special." "Coming right up." Ethan turned to the espresso machine, grateful for the familiar routine of his work. He could feel the woman's presence behind him, warm and somehow different from his usual customers. "New to the area?" he asked, tamping down the coffee grounds with practiced precision. "Actually, no. I grew up here, but I've been away for a while. I'm Grace. Grace Whitmore." Ethan nearly dropped the portafilter. Whitmore, as in Whitmore Industries, the biggest employer in town. He recovered quickly, focusing on pulling the perfect shot of espresso. "Well, welcome back to town, Grace. I'm Ethan Carter, and that's my daughter Lily over there." Lily gave a small wave from her corner, then quickly returned to her coloring, though Ethan could tell she was still listening intently. "She's adorable," Grace said, her voice softening. "How old is she?" 7 going on 30, Ethan chuckled, starting to steam the milk. The familiar whir filled the shop. "She's my little manager in training." Grace laughed, and the sound was genuine, lacking the polite restraint Ethan might have expected from someone of her background. "I can tell she takes her job very seriously." As Ethan worked on the milk foam, his hands moved on autopilot, falling into the pattern he'd developed over years of making special drinks for Lily. Without thinking, he drew a delicate heart in the foam, something he usually reserved for his daughter's hot chocolate. It wasn't until he set the cup down that he realized what he'd done. He felt his cheeks warm slightly. "I'm sorry, force of habit. I can make you another one if you'd prefer." But Grace was staring at the cup with an expression of genuine delight. "Please don't. It's perfect." She picked up the cup carefully, as if it contained something precious rather than just coffee. "No one's ever done something like that for me before." "Daddy makes the best hearts," Lily piped up from her corner, apparently unable to contain herself any longer. "Sometimes he makes bunnies too, but the hearts are my favorite." Grace turned toward Lily, her smile widening. "Is that so? Well, I think I agree with you about the hearts." She took a sip, closing her eyes briefly. "And the coffee is incredible too." Instead of taking her drink to go like most morning customers, Grace lingered at the counter. "Do you mind if I stay for a bit? It's so peaceful in here." "Of course," Ethan replied, gesturing to the empty tables. "Make yourself comfortable." Grace chose a seat near Lily's corner, and Ethan couldn't help but notice how she genuinely engaged with his daughter, asking about her drawings and favorite colors. There was nothing condescending in her manner. She spoke to Lily like a person, not a child to be humored. The morning light grew stronger, and still Grace stayed, sipping her coffee slowly and chatting with both of them between Ethan's tasks of wiping counters and restocking supplies. Her presence filled the shop with something indefinable, a warmth that had nothing to do with coffee or sunlight. Finally, Grace glanced at her watch and stood up. "I should go, but this was—" She paused, searching for the right words. "This was exactly what I needed this morning. Thank you, both of you." She gathered her designer bag and headed for the door, then turned back. "I'll definitely be back tomorrow. Save me another heart cappuccino?" "We'll be here," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice casual. After Grace left, Ethan watched through the window as she walked down the street, her cream coat catching the morning light. He told himself she was just another customer, even as something inside him knew that wasn't true. "Daddy?" Lily's voice broke into his thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart? I like her." Lily's eyes sparkled with mischief. "And you made her one of your special hearts. That was just—" Ethan fumbled for words. "That was just being nice to a customer." "Sure, Daddy." Lily returned to her coloring, but not before Ethan caught her knowing smile, an expression that seemed far too wise for her 7 years. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the coffee shop's worn wooden floor. Steam rose from the milk pitcher as Ethan prepared for another day, the familiar whir of the grinder bringing comfort to his morning routine. At the counter, Lily sat perched on a stool, her legs swinging as she munched on her toast and scrambled eggs. "Daddy, can I have more juice?" Lily asked, holding up her empty glass with both hands. Ethan smiled, reaching for the orange juice pitcher they kept in the small fridge behind the counter. "Here you go, sweetie. Make sure to finish your breakfast before school." The bell above the door chimed, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat as Grace walked in. Today, she wore a cream-colored sweater that somehow made her look both elegant and approachable. Her eyes sparkled with warmth as she approached the counter. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying a hint of playfulness. "I'd love another one of those special heart coffees, if you don't mind." Ethan felt his cheeks warm slightly. "Coming right up," he said, trying to sound casual. He busied himself with the espresso machine, aware of the other customers watching with interest. Mrs. Jenkins, a regular who usually kept to herself in the corner with her crossword puzzle, leaned over to whisper something to Mr. Peterson at the next table. Their eyes darted between Grace and Ethan, clearly intrigued by the well-dressed young woman who seemed so at ease in their modest neighborhood coffee shop. "Is that the same lady from yesterday?" Lily whispered loudly, making Ethan chuckle despite himself. Grace smiled at Lily. "I am. And who might you be?" "I'm Lily," she replied, sitting up straighter. "That's my daddy. He makes the best coffee in the whole world." "Does he now?" Grace's eyes met Ethan's for a moment. "Well, I think I have to agree with you there." Ethan focused on steaming the milk to the perfect temperature, trying to ignore the flutter in his stomach. As he poured the silky foam into the rich espresso, his hands moved automatically, creating a heart that was even more defined than yesterday's. "Here you go," he said, sliding the cup across the counter. Grace's face lit up. "It's beautiful, even better than yesterday's." She reached for her wallet, but Ethan waved her off. "This one's on the house," he said, surprising himself. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Ethan insisted. "Consider it a thank you for making my daughter smile." Lily, who had been rummaging through her backpack, suddenly pulled out a piece of paper. "Look what I made!" She held up one of her napkin drawings, a collection of hearts in different colors, surrounded by what looked like coffee cups. Grace gasped in delight. "Did you draw this? It's wonderful." "You can have it if you want," Lily offered shyly, holding out the napkin. "Really? I would love that, thank you." Grace accepted the drawing carefully, as if it were a precious piece of art. "You know, I used to love drawing when I was your age, too." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "What did you draw?" "Oh, all sorts of things. Horses mostly. I was obsessed with them." "I love horses," Lily exclaimed. "Daddy, can we get a horse?" Ethan laughed, relief flooding through him at how natural this all felt. "I don't think our apartment allows horses, sweetheart." Maybe you could draw some horses for me sometime? Grace suggested to Lily, who nodded enthusiastically. As they chatted, more customers filtered in, their eyes lingering on the scene before them. The usually quiet morning crowd seemed more animated, sharing knowing looks and warm smiles. Mrs. Jenkins even abandoned her crossword puzzle to watch the interaction. "So," Grace said, turning back to Ethan, "how long have you owned this place?" "Going on 5 years now," he replied, wiping down the espresso machine. "It was a bit run down when I bought it, but he made it beautiful," Lily chimed in. "He fixed everything himself." Grace looked around the shop with new appreciation. "You did all this yourself? That's impressive." Ethan shrugged, but couldn't help feeling pleased. "It's nothing fancy, but it's home." "Sometimes the simplest things are the most special," Grace said softly, her fingers tracing the heart in her coffee. The morning light caught her hair just so, and Ethan found himself noticing how it turned golden at the edges. He quickly looked away, busying himself with reorganizing the coffee cups that didn't need reorganizing. "Oh," Grace glanced at her watch. "I should get going. I have a meeting across town." She carefully folded Lily's drawing and tucked it into her purse. "Thank you for the coffee, Ethan, and thank you for the beautiful artwork, Lily. Will you come back tomorrow?" Lily asked hopefully. Grace's eyes met Ethan's briefly before she answered, "I'd like that very much." After she left, the shop seemed to buzz with a new energy. Customers who normally kept to themselves were chatting with each other, and even Mrs. Jenkins ventured up to the counter to tell Ethan what a lovely young woman Grace was. As Ethan wiped down the counter, he caught himself smiling. The morning sun seemed brighter somehow, the coffee smelled sweeter, and the usual weight of running the struggling shop felt lighter on his shoulders. He looked around at his coffee shop, at the worn but clean tables, the carefully arranged pastry display, the wall of photos showing the place's transformation, and for the first time in months, it felt truly alive. "Daddy," Lily said, gathering her school things, "your coffee shop feels happy today." Ethan paused in his cleaning, struck by the simple truth in his daughter's words. "You know what, sweetheart? I think you're right." The morning light streamed through the windows of Carter's Coffee as Ethan unlocked the front door. He barely had time to flip the closed sign to open when he noticed something different. A small cluster of people waited outside, chattering eagerly among themselves. "Good morning," he said, holding the door open. The bell chimed as they filed in, more than he usually saw this early. Lily bounced beside him, her pigtails swaying as she clutched a stack of napkins to her chest. "Can I help hand these out, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart." Ethan ruffled her hair. "Just remember what we practiced. 1 napkin per person." Lily finished with a serious nod, though her smile never wavered. Throughout the morning, the bell above the door chimed more times than Ethan could count. The usual quiet of his shop filled with the buzz of conversation and the scraping of chairs. He caught fragments of whispers as he worked. "Did you hear about the Whitmore girl? I saw her here yesterday. Never thought I'd see one of them in a place like this." Ethan kept his head down, focusing on crafting each drink with care. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, grinding beans, tamping espresso, steaming milk to just the right temperature. But he couldn't help noticing how customers lingered longer than usual, their eyes drifting to the door each time the bell rang. Lily weaved between tables, dispensing napkins and smiles in equal measure. "Here you go," she chirped to each person. Some of the regulars had already learned to expect the little drawings she'd added in crayon wobbly hearts and stars decorating the corners. By early afternoon, Ethan's shoulders ached from the constant movement, but his tip jar was fuller than he'd seen in months. He was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed again, and this time he looked up. Grace stood in the doorway, sunlight catching in her hair. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, but something about her still marked her as different, maybe the perfect cut of her clothes or the elegant way she carried herself. "Grace!" Lily abandoned her napkin duties and rushed forward. "Hello, sweetheart." Grace laughed, kneeling to accept Lily's enthusiastic hug. "I love your pigtails today." "Daddy did them," Lily announced proudly. "Do you want to see my new drawings?" Ethan watched as his daughter tugged Grace toward her favorite corner table, where colored pencils and paper were scattered across the surface. The sight made his chest tight in a way he couldn't quite name. "Looks busy today," Grace observed, glancing around at the nearly full tables. "Yeah, it's been." Ethan searched for the right word. "Different." A group of college students waved from across the room, their cups empty. Ethan started preparing their refills, but Grace was already moving. "Let me help," she said, reaching for the serving tray. "I used to waitress during summers in college." "You don't have to. I want to." Her smile was warm and genuine, no trace of condescension. "Besides, it looks like you could use an extra hand." Together, they fell into an easy rhythm. Grace carried drinks while Ethan made them, her presence somehow both disrupting and completing the familiar flow of his workday. She laughed with customers, asked Lily about her drawings, and seemed completely unbothered by the curious stares that followed her. Hours passed like minutes. The afternoon sun slanted low through the windows when the last customer finally left. Ethan's feet ached, but a different feeling overshadowed the exhaustion, something light and warm, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. "Thank you," he said, as Grace gathered her things to leave. "You didn't have to stay and help. I enjoyed it." She paused at the door. "See you tomorrow?" Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After she left, he and Lily cleaned up in comfortable silence, his daughter humming quietly as she collected scattered napkins and straightened chairs. Later that night, in their small apartment above the shop, Ethan tucked Lily into bed. Her room was cozy, walls covered in her artwork, bright splashes of crayon and marker that made the space feel alive. "Story time?" she asked, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. "One short one," Ethan agreed, settling beside her on the narrow bed. But before he could reach for a book, Lily turned to him with serious eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, her small hand finding his. "She makes you smile." Ethan's breath caught. He looked down at his daughter, this tiny person, who somehow saw right through him. The observation was simple, but hit him like a gentle thunderclap. He felt warmth spread through his chest, mixed with an unsettling flutter of anxiety. "Get some sleep, sweetheart," he managed, kissing her forehead. Lily snuggled deeper under her blanket, already drifting off, while Ethan sat there, his daughter's words echoing in his mind. The evening shadows stretched across Carter's coffee as Ethan methodically mopped the floor, his movements automatic after years of the same closing routine. The last customer had left an hour ago, and only the hum of the refrigerator kept him company. Lily sat at her usual corner table, humming softly while drawing on napkins, her latest artistic obsession since Grace had praised her artwork. "Almost done, sweetheart," Ethan called out, wringing the mop into the bucket. The scent of cleaning solution mixed with the lingering aroma of coffee beans. "Just need to count the register, and then we can head home." The shop phone's sharp ring cut through the quiet, making both of them jump. Ethan glanced at the wall clock. 8:45 p.m. Strange hour for a call. "Carter's coffee," he answered, leaning the mop against the counter. "Mr. Carter." The voice on the other end was deep and authoritative, each word precise and clipped. "This is Charles Whitmore, Grace's father." Ethan's grip tightened on the receiver. He'd heard about Charles Whitmore. Everyone in town had. The businessman's reputation for being ruthless in negotiations was legendary. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. What can I do for you?" Ethan kept his voice steady, though his heart had begun to race. "I'll be direct, Mr. Carter. We need to discuss my daughter." Charles's tone grew colder. "I understand she's been spending considerable time at your establishment." Ethan watched Lily doodle another heart on her napkin, blissfully unaware of the tension in her father's shoulders. "Sir, No, not over the phone," Charles cut him off. "My office. Tomorrow morning at 9. I trust you can find someone to watch your shop?" It wasn't really a question. Ethan ran through his mental list of employees, knowing he'd have to call in a favor. "I'll be there," Ethan said, trying to maintain his dignity despite feeling like he was being summoned for judgment. "Good. My secretary will email you the address." Charles paused. "And Mr. Carter, let's keep this between us. No need to upset Grace with these business matters." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, his hands slightly shaking. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice carried across the shop. She had stopped drawing and was watching him with worried eyes. "Are we in trouble?" Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, forcing a smile onto his face. "No, sweetie. Nothing like that. Just a business meeting tomorrow morning." Was that Grace's daddy? Lily's perception sometimes startled him. He sounded mad on the phone. "Some daddies just sound that way," Ethan said, smoothing her hair. "Everything's fine. Now, how about we finish up here and head home? It's getting late." Lily nodded, but her usual cheerfulness had dimmed. She gathered her drawings while Ethan returned to his tasks, though his movements were less steady now. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. The rest of the closing duties passed in a blur. Ethan's hands moved automatically, wiping tables, stacking chairs, counting the register. But his thoughts kept returning to tomorrow's meeting. He'd have to call Sarah to open the shop, explain things to Lily's teacher about dropping her off early. Finally, everything was done except the coffee machine. Ethan stood before it, his reflection distorted in its chrome surface. The machine that had given him a new start after losing his wife, that had allowed him to support Lily, that had unexpectedly brought Grace into their lives, and now might be at the center of everything changing. The familiar equipment suddenly felt foreign under his hands. Each lever and button that he knew by heart now seemed to mock him with their shine, a reminder of the gulf between his world and the Whitmores. He stared at his reflection, seeing not just himself, but everything he had built, everything he had to protect. "Ready to go home, Daddy?" Lily appeared at his side, her backpack stuffed with her day's artwork. Ethan looked down at his daughter's trusting face and felt the weight of tomorrow's meeting even more heavily. He had worked so hard to give her stability, to make their little world secure. Now Charles Whitmore's phone call threatened to upset that careful balance. "Ready, sweetheart," he said, taking her small hand in his. He took one last look at the coffee machine, its surface now reflecting both their faces in the dim evening light. Tomorrow loomed before him like a storm on the horizon, but for now, he needed to be strong for Lily. The bell above the door chimed one final time as they stepped out into the cool evening air. Ethan locked up, each turn of the key feeling heavier than usual. His coffee shop, his sanctuary, suddenly felt less like a safe haven and more like the eye of a gathering storm. The glass and steel building towered over Ethan as he stood on the sidewalk, tugging at his best flannel shirt. He'd ironed it twice this morning, but next to the pristine windows reflecting the morning sun, it still looked shabby. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that could have fit his entire coffee shop 3 times over. "Mr. Carter?" A receptionist in a crisp black suit looked up from behind a curved marble desk. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. 15th floor." The elevator ride felt endless. Ethan's reflection in the polished doors showed a man trying his best to stand tall, but his weathered boots and careful patch job on his jacket sleeve told a different story. He remembered Lily's tight hug this morning, how she'd insisted on helping him pick out his meeting clothes. The elevator doors opened to reveal an entire floor of gleaming hardwood and modern art. Another receptionist led him down a long hallway, their footsteps echoing. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole town spread out below like a miniature display. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now," the receptionist said, opening heavy double doors. Charles Whitmore's office was bigger than Ethan's entire apartment. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat Grace's father, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than Ethan's monthly income. He didn't stand up, "Mr. Carter." Charles's voice was cool and precise. "Please, sit." Ethan lowered himself into a leather chair that probably cost more than his coffee machine. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for—" "Let's not waste time with pleasantries." Charles leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I'll be direct. My daughter has been spending an unusual amount of time in your establishment." The pause before establishment made Ethan's jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "Grace has been a welcome customer." "Yes, I'm sure she has." Charles pulled out a leather folder, opening it with deliberate slowness. "I've had my people look into your business, Mr. Carter. The mortgage payments, The declining revenue before my daughter's visits, the struggles of a single father trying to keep a failing coffee shop afloat. He looked up, his eyes sharp. It must be difficult. Ethan's hands gripped the armrests, but he remained silent. I'm prepared to help you with that difficulty. Charles pulled out a check and slid it across the desk. This should cover your outstanding debts and provide a comfortable cushion for you and your daughter to start fresh, somewhere else. The amount on the check made Ethan's throat go dry. It was more money than he'd seen in his life. All I ask in return is that you end, whatever this situation is, with my daughter. No more special coffee art. No more friendly chats. No more using her presence to drum up business. Heat rose in Ethan's face. I've never used Grace for, Mr. Carter. Charles's voice cut like steel. Let's be honest. You're a widowed barista with a mountain of debt and a child to support. My daughter is a Whitmore, educated at the finest schools, accustomed to a certain lifestyle. What could you possibly offer her except the novelty of slumming it at a quaint little coffee shop? Each word landed like a physical blow. Ethan thought of his shabby apartment, the carefully balanced budget, the nights spent worrying about Lily's future. But he also thought of Grace's genuine smile, the way she listened to Lily's stories, how she never made him feel less than anyone else. Sir, Ethan said quietly, standing up, I appreciate your concern for Grace, but I can't accept your money. Charles's expression hardened. Don't be foolish. This is a generous offer. Hit Island. But Grace's friendship isn't for sale. Ethan's voice remained steady despite his racing heart. And neither is my self-respect. Friendship? Charles laughed, a cold sound. My daughter doesn't need friends who serve her coffee. She needs to focus on her future, on maintaining the standards she was raised with. He stood, towering over the desk. You'll never be more than a charity case to our world, Mr. Carter. Take the money. Give your daughter a better life. It's the smart choice. Ethan looked at the check one last time, then turned toward the door. Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore. You're making a mistake, Charles called after him. One you'll regret when reality sets in. The walk back through the office felt longer than before. Ethan's legs were shaky by the time he reached the elevator. He watched the floor numbers tick down, Charles's words echoing in his head. Maybe the man was right. What did he have to offer someone like Grace? The evening sun was setting when Ethan finally returned to his coffee shop. The familiar smell of coffee beans and warm pastries usually comforted him, but today it just reminded him of the gulf between his world and the Whitmore's. He was wiping down the counter, lost in thought, when the bell above the door chimed. Hey, stranger! Grace's voice was bright as sunshine. She wore a simple sweater today, her hair in a casual ponytail, but she still looked elegant. I missed my morning coffee. Think I could get one with extra heart? Ethan forced his lips into a smile, trying to ignore the weight in his chest. Coming right up. The morning sun cast long shadows through the coffee shop's windows as Grace pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming above her head. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but something felt different today. Ethan stood behind the counter, methodically wiping the same spot over and over, his shoulders tense. Good morning, Grace called out, her smile faltering, when Ethan barely looked up. Morning, he mumbled, already reaching for a cup. The usual? Grace watched as he went through the motions of making her cappuccino. His movements were mechanical, missing the usual care and warmth she'd come to expect. No playful banter, no gentle smile, and most notably, no heart in the foam. Ethan? She leaned against the counter, trying to catch his eye. Is everything okay? In the corner, Lily looked up from her coloring books, her small face pinched with worry. She'd been unusually quiet, too, casting concerned glances at her father every few minutes. I'm fine, Ethan said, sliding the cup across the counter. Just tired. No, you're not fine. Grace reached out, her hand hovering near his arm, but not quite touching. Please talk to me. What happened? Ethan's hands stilled on the counter. The morning sunlight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, highlighting the exhaustion on his face. He glanced around the empty shop, then at Lily, who pretended to be absorbed in her drawing. "Your father called yesterday," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We had a meeting this morning." Grace's breath caught. "What? My father? What did he—" She stopped, realization dawning on her face. "Oh no! What did he do?" Ethan rubbed his neck, avoiding her gaze. He made things very clear, about his expectations, about what he thinks island, appropriate for his daughter. "And?" Grace pressed, her knuckles white against the counter's edge. "He offered me money." The words came out rough, like they hurt his throat. "To stay away from you." Grace's gasp echoed in the quiet shop. "He what?" "A check. Quite generous, actually." Ethan's laugh was hollow. "Enough to fix up the shop, maybe even open a second location. All I had to do was—" He gestured vaguely between them. "Tell me you didn't take it," Grace whispered. Finally, Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes. "Of course not. But Grace, maybe he's right. I'm just a coffee shop owner. A widower with a 7-year-old. You deserve—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Grace's voice cracked with emotion. "Don't you dare let my father decide what I deserve." From her corner, Lily had abandoned any pretense of not listening. Her crayon hung forgotten in her hand, her eyes wide as she watched the adults. "He had no right," Grace continued, angry tears threatening to spill. "No right to interfere. No right to try to buy you off like some inconvenience to be dealt with. Grace, no." She slammed her palm on the counter, making the nearby cups rattle. "I decide who I spend time with. I decide who I care about. Not him, not his money, not his precious reputation." A small sniffle from the corner drew their attention. Lily stood there, clutching one of her drawings, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart," Grace said, her anger melting into concern. Before either adult could move, Lily ran around the counter and threw her arms around Grace's waist, burying her face in her skirt. "Please don't go away," she mumbled into the fabric. Grace knelt down, gathering the little girl in her arms. "I'm not going anywhere, honey. I promise." Ethan watched them, his heart twisting in his chest. Grace held Lily like she belonged there, stroking her hair and wiping her tears with gentle fingers. It was a scene he'd never dared hope for after losing his wife, his daughter in the arms of someone who looked at her with such pure love. "Your father can't buy this," Grace said, looking up at Ethan while still holding Lily. "He can't put a price on what we're building here." "And what exactly are we building?" Ethan asked softly. Grace stood up, keeping one arm around Lily. "Something real. Something honest." She reached for his hand across the counter. "Something worth fighting for." The touch of her fingers against his sent warmth, spreading through Ethan's chest, pushing back the cold doubt Charles had planted there. Lily's small hand joined theirs on the counter, and for a moment they were connected. A perfect triangle of touch and trust. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and coffee, but Grace stayed. She helped serve during the afternoon rush, learned how to work the register, and made Lily giggle by attempting latte art that looked more like abstract expressionism than hearts. As evening approached, they sat together at Lily's corner table, sharing the day's leftover pastries and coffee. Lily had produced a stack of drawings, hearts and flowers, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Grace's laugh rang out as Lily explained why she'd given stick figure Ethan such big ears. "Because you're good at listening, Daddy." And even Ethan couldn't help but join in. But as the sun set and the shadows lengthened across the floor, reality crept back in. While Grace helped Lily clean up her crayons, Ethan moved through his closing routine, wiping tables, counting the register, sweeping the floor. Each task felt heavier than usual, weighted down by the memory of Charles Whitmore's cold eyes and calculated offer. Grace and Lily's laughter echoed from the corner, bright and beautiful and fragile. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he turned the lock on the front door, the key scraping against metal. The closed sign swung gently, casting dancing shadows on the floor. Despite the warmth of the evening they'd shared, despite Grace's fierce declarations and Lily's trusting embrace, Charles' words still whispered in the back of his mind. "You'll never be more than a charity case." The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the cafe's worn floorboards as Grace stepped through the door, her designer handbag replaced by a simple canvas tote. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, a far cry from her usual polished appearance. "I'm here to help," she announced, moving behind the counter before Ethan could protest. Ethan blinked, coffee pot frozen mid-pour. "Grace, you don't have to." "I want to." She tied a spare apron around her waist with determined fingers. "And I have some ideas that could really help the shop." Lily, perched on her usual stool with a coloring book, clapped her hands. "Can Grace stay and work with us, Daddy? Please?" Ethan set down the coffee pot, his expression wavering between hesitation and something softer. "This isn't exactly what you're used to." "That's exactly why I want to do it." Grace pulled out her phone, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "First things first, this place needs a social media presence. When was the last time you posted anything online about the cafe?" "Posted?" Ethan scratched his head. "I put up flyers last Christmas." Grace laughed, the sound warming the morning air. "Oh, we have work to do." Throughout the morning rush, Grace proved surprisingly capable. She picked up the basics of operating the espresso machine quickly, though her first few attempts at foam art were more abstract than artistic. What she lacked in barista experience, she made up for with genuine warmth toward the customers. During a quiet moment, Grace showed Ethan and Lily the Instagram account she'd created for the cafe. "Look, I took photos of your coffee art. People love this stuff, and Lily's drawings would make perfect content, too." "My drawings?" Lily peered at the phone screen, eyes wide. "Of course. Your hearts are part of what makes this place special." Ethan watched as Grace and Lily huddled together, his daughter explaining the stories behind her latest crayon masterpieces. Something tight in his chest began to loosen. As the day progressed, Grace introduced more ideas. She suggested new pastry combinations, drawing from her travels abroad. When a sample batch of lavender lemon scones sold out in hours, even Ethan had to admit she was onto something. "See?" Grace said, flour dusting her cheek. "People want something unique, something that feels special." Customers seemed drawn to their dynamic. Regular patrons smiled at the sight of Grace teaching Lily how to arrange cookies on display plates, or Ethan showing Grace the perfect way to steam milk. The cafe hummed with a new energy. By mid-afternoon, Grace had convinced Ethan to rearrange some of the furniture, creating a cozy reading nook in the corner. Lily immediately claimed it as her new coloring spot. "This is where people can sit and really enjoy their coffee," Grace explained, plumping a throw pillow she'd brought from her car. "It's about creating an experience, not just serving drinks." "You really think about these things, don't you?" Ethan asked, watching her adjust a small potted plant. "I've spent enough time in cafes trying to find somewhere that feels like." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Like home." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Throughout the day, Grace took photos of happy customers, Lily's artwork, and Ethan's best coffee creations. She showed them how the posts were already getting attention online. "Look at these comments!" Lily bounced on her toes. "They love Daddy's heart coffee." "They sure do," Grace smiled, shooting Ethan a knowing look that made his ears turn pink. As closing time approached, they worked together in comfortable rhythm, Ethan washing dishes, Grace wiping tables, and Lily gathering her art supplies. The cafe felt different somehow, as if Grace had breathed new life into its old walls. "I think that's everything," Grace said, hanging up her apron. Her ponytail had come loose, wisps of hair framing her face. "Let me walk you to your car," Ethan offered, picking up a sleepy Lily. "It's getting dark." They stepped out into the evening air, still warm from the day's sunday. The street was quiet except for distant cricket song and the soft scuff of their shoes on the sidewalk. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "For today. For everything." Grace reached her car and turned to face them, her smile gentle in the fading light. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" He nodded, feeling something bloom in his chest, something that felt remarkably like hope. Lily raised her head from Ethan's shoulder. "Promise?" "Promise," Grace said, reaching out to squeeze Lily's hand. "Someone needs to help me with my foam art practice." They watched as Grace got into her car, waving as she drove away. Ethan stood there a moment longer, holding his daughter, letting himself feel the simple rightness of the day. For the first time in years, the evening didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The morning crowd had given way to the lunch rush, and Ethan's cafe hummed with more life than it had seen in months. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with excited chatter as new customers filed in, their eyes scanning the menu board and inevitably landing on the specialty drinks section where Heart Cappuccino now held pride of place. "Is this where they make those special coffees?" a young woman in a business suit asked, her phone already poised to take pictures. "My friend showed me some posts online." Grace, who was arranging pastries in the display case, straightened up with a warm smile. "You're in the right place. Ethan's the artist behind those hearts." Ethan felt his cheeks warm as he focused on the espresso machine, carefully steaming milk for another order. He still wasn't used to all the attention his simple foam designs were getting. What had started as a way to make Lily smile had somehow turned into the talk of the town. Mrs. Peterson, a regular who'd been coming to the cafe since before Lily was born, leaned across her table to whisper to her friend, "Would you look at that? They work so well together, don't they?" Her voice carried just enough for Ethan to catch it. "But she's a Whitmore," her companion whispered back. "You know what they say about mixing oil and water?" Ethan's hands faltered slightly as he poured the milk, but he steadied them, determined not to let the gossip affect his work. The heart formed perfectly in the foam, and he added a small flourish around the edges. "Daddy makes the best hearts," Lily announced proudly from her homework spot near the counter, loud enough for everyone to hear. She beamed at the customer receiving the cappuccino, her gap-toothed smile impossible to resist. The customer, a middle-aged man Ethan had never seen before, broke into a genuine smile. "Well, if you say so, young lady, it must be true." He took a careful sip and nodded appreciatively. "And you're absolutely right." Grace moved behind the counter to help with the dishes, her shoulder brushing against Ethan's as she reached for a clean cloth. The simple contact sent a warm current through him, and he noticed several customers watching their interaction with interested expressions. "Don't mind them," Grace murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. "They'll find something else to talk about eventually." But the whispers continued throughout the afternoon. Some were kind, like old Mr. Jenkins saying it was about time. Ethan found happiness again. Others were less so, with phrases like social climbing and out of his league floating around the cafe. Lily, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of adult drama, continued to distribute her hand-drawn hearts to customers. She had taken to decorating the napkins with colorful designs, and people were starting to request them specifically. "Your daughter's quite the artist too," a woman remarked as she accepted one of Lily's creations. "Must run in the family." "Oh, I'm not," Grace started to say, but Lily cut her off. "Grace helps me pick the colors," she declared proudly. "And she knows all about art. She went to a special school in New York." The afternoon mellowed into evening, and the crowd thinned out. As the last customers left, Grace helped clean up while Lily finished her homework. The familiar routine they'd developed over the past week felt natural, comfortable. "Stay for dinner?" Ethan found himself asking before he could second-guess it. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs." "That sounds perfect," Grace replied, her eyes lighting up. "I'm tired of fancy anyway." At home, Ethan's modest kitchen came alive with activity. Lily insisted on helping Grace make the salad while Ethan handled the pasta and sauce. The kitchen wasn't built for 3 people to move around in, but somehow they managed, dancing around each other with laughs and playful excuses. "Sorry," Grace giggled as she bumped into Ethan reaching for the colander. Her hand steadied herself against his arm, lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. No, my fault," Ethan replied, hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. Lily watched them with obvious delight as she set the small kitchen table with their everyday plates, the ones with tiny chips on the edges, and faded patterns that told the story of years of use. The spaghetti was simple but delicious, made better by the company. Lily dominated the conversation, sharing stories about school and her art projects, while Grace listened with genuine interest. Ethan found himself watching them both, his heart swelling at how natural it all felt. After dinner, Grace insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Ethan's protests. She and Lily fell into an efficient system, Grace washing while Lily dried with exaggerated care, standing on her step stool to reach the counter. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, taking in the scene before him. The yellow kitchen light cast a warm glow over them both, making Grace's hair shine and highlighting Lily's concentrated expression as she carefully dried each plate. The radio played softly in the background, some old love song that seemed to fit the moment perfectly. Looking at them, Grace, with soap suds up to her elbows, laughing at something Lily had said, and his daughter grinning up at her with complete adoration, Ethan felt hope bloom in his chest. It was a dangerous feeling, one that scared him as much as it thrilled him. He'd forgotten what it was like to want something this much, to see a future that included more than just him and Lily. "Earth to Dad," Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. "Grace showed me how to make the bubbles into shapes. Look," she held up a soap-covered hand, attempting to form something that might have been a heart. "Very artistic," Ethan praised, moving closer to join them at the sink. The kitchen was small enough that standing next to Grace meant standing very close indeed, and he could smell the light floral scent of her shampoo mixed with the lemon dish soap. "Your daughter's a natural," Grace said, her smile soft and genuine. "Must run in the family." Golden lights twinkled overhead in the town square as dusk settled into a perfect October evening. The fall festival was in full swing, transforming the familiar space into something magical. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the autumn breeze, casting warm circles of light across the cobblestones. Lily skipped between Ethan and Grace, her small hand clutching each of theirs as they made their way through the festival crowd. Her eyes sparkled at the sight of carnival games and decorative pumpkins lining the pathways. "Look, look!" Lily pointed excitedly at a pumpkin carving station. "Can we make one, please, Daddy?" Ethan smiled, catching Grace's eye over Lily's head. "What do you think, Grace? Ready to get your hands messy?" "Lead the way, pumpkin experts," Grace laughed, already rolling up the sleeves of her cream sweater. They found 3 spots at the long table covered in newspaper. The festival volunteer handed them each a pumpkin and carving tools. Lily immediately started drawing a face on hers with a marker, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "I haven't done this since I was a kid," Grace admitted, examining her pumpkin with amusement. "We always had professional decorators do our fall displays." "Well, there's nothing professional about this," Ethan chuckled, already elbow-deep in pumpkin seeds. "The messier, the better." As they worked, neighbors and regular customers passed by, offering warm greetings. Mrs. Henderson from the bookstore paused to admire their progress, her eyes twinkling as she watched Grace help Lily scoop out pumpkin innards. "You 3 look right at home together," Mrs. Henderson commented softly to Ethan, patting his shoulder before moving along. Ethan's hands stilled for a moment, warmth spreading through his chest as he watched Grace and Lily giggling together, their cheeks flushed from laughter in the cool evening air. They did feel like home. After finishing their pumpkins, Lily's sporting a crooked but cheerful grin, Grace's attempting an artistic flower design, and Ethan's traditional jack-o'-lantern face, they wandered through the festival. The air was rich with the scent of caramel apples and cinnamon, mixing with the earthy autumn breeze. "Cotton candy!" Lily bounced on her toes, pointing to a vendor with a pink and blue swirling machine. "After dinner," Ethan promised, steering them toward the food stalls. "Let's get something proper to eat first." They shared plates of festival food at a picnic table, hot dogs for Lily, pulled pork sandwiches for the adults, and a heap of crispy fries they all picked at together. Grace insisted on buying them all caramel apples for dessert, and Ethan couldn't help but smile at the sight of her, elegant as always, carefully maneuvering the sticky treat. As evening deepened, string lights illuminated the square more brightly. A local band set up on the small stage, and the first notes of acoustic guitar filled the air. Couples began gathering in the open space before the stage, swaying to the music. "Dance with me?" Grace asked softly, extending her hand to Ethan. He hesitated for just a moment, his heart picking up speed. "Lily, honey, will you be okay sitting right here where we can see you?" Lily nodded eagerly, already pulling out her drawing pad from her little backpack. "I'll draw the dancing." Taking Grace's hand, Ethan led her to the makeshift dance floor. The band was playing a slow country song, the kind that filled local radio stations on quiet evenings. Grace stepped closer, placing one hand in his and the other on his shoulder. "I should warn you," Ethan said quietly as they began to move. "I haven't danced in years." "That's okay." Grace smiled up at him. "We'll go slow." They swayed together under the canopy of lights, their movements growing more natural with each passing moment. Grace's hand was warm in his, and her perfume carried hints of vanilla and autumn spice. Around them, other couples danced, and children played at the edges of the crowd, but Ethan barely noticed them. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Grace murmured, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. "Thank you for wanting to be," Ethan replied, his voice rough with emotion. From their table, Lily watched them with a huge grin, her crayon moving quickly across paper as she captured the moment in her own way. Several times, she caught them looking her way and waved enthusiastically, making them both laugh. As the song drew to a close, Ethan realized he felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of loneliness that had pressed on his shoulders for so long had lifted, replaced by something warm and hopeful. They collected Lily, who proudly showed them her drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. Grace immediately declared it a masterpiece and asked if she could keep it. The festival was winding down as they made their way home, following the quiet residential streets. Lily walked ahead, trying to catch the last lightning bugs of the season, her laughter echoing in the peaceful evening. Under a sky scattered with stars, Ethan turned to Grace. "I need to tell you something," he said softly, taking her hand. "You've brought so much joy back into our lives. Both of us. We're happier than we've been in a long time." Grace squeezed his hand in response, her eyes shining with understanding and affection as they continued their walk home through the starlit evening. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Ethan's cafe as he approached, keys jingling in his hand. His steps slowed when he noticed Mr. Peterson, his landlord, waiting by the entrance. The older man's face was drawn, his usually friendly expression replaced with something that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Morning, Mr. Peterson," Ethan said, his voice careful as he unlocked the door. "You're here early." Mr. Peterson wouldn't meet his eyes. "Ethan, we need to talk." Inside, the cafe was quiet and dark. Ethan flipped on the lights, revealing the neat rows of tables he'd arranged the night before. The coffee machines waited silently, ready for another busy day. But something in Mr. Peterson's demeanor told him this wouldn't be like any other morning. "I've been your landlord for what, 6 years now?" Mr. Peterson began, wringing his hands. "Never missed a payment, always kept the place nice." "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, though deep down, he already knew. "I'm terminating your lease," Mr. Peterson said quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Effective immediately." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the counter. "What? You can't? We have a contract." Mr. Peterson pulled out a stack of papers. "There's a clause about immediate termination under certain circumstances. I'm exercising it." Ethan's mind raced. Yesterday, everything had been perfect. The festival, the dance with Grace, Lily's laughter. Now this. Then it clicked. "Charles Whitmore," Ethan said flatly. "He got to you, didn't he?" Mr. Peterson's silence was answer enough. "How much?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "How much did he offer you? To throw us out?" "Ethan, please understand. I have a daughter to support." Ethan's voice rose. "This shop is everything we have." The bell above the door chimed. Grace rushed in, her face flushed from running. "Ethan, I just heard from a friend what my father—" She stopped short, seeing Mr. Peterson. Ethan couldn't look at her. The shame and anger burned too hot. "Your father won," he said bitterly. "Congratulations." "No, Ethan, please." Grace reached for his arm. "We can fight this. I'll talk to him." "Fight this?" Ethan jerked away. "With what? Your money? Your connections? Is that how everything works in your world? Just throw money at problems until they go away?" Grace flinched as if he'd slapped her. "That's not fair. You know I'm not like that. Don't you see?" Ethan's voice cracked. "This is exactly why we can't work. Your father was right. Our worlds are too different. Daddy? Lily's small voice came from the back room. She must have arrived with Grace, Ethan realized. His daughter stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Are we losing our shop? The sight of his daughter crying broke something in Ethan. All his careful plans, all his hopes of giving her stability, gone. He'd failed her, just like he'd failed at everything else. I'll give you until tonight to clear out, Mr. Peterson said quietly, placing the papers on a nearby table. I truly am sorry, Ethan. The bell chimed again as Mr. Peterson left. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan, Grace tried again, her voice thick with tears. Please let me help. Haven't you helped enough? The words came out harsh, bitter. Look what loving you has cost us. As soon as he said it, he wished he could take it back. Grace's face crumpled, and Lily sobbed harder. I never meant, Grace whispered. I never wanted this. Maybe you should go, Ethan said, turning away. Both worlds back where they belong. Grace stood there a moment longer, then walked to Lily and hugged her tight. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she whispered. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes, and left without another word. The day passed in a blur of boxes and packing. Regular customers stopped by, shocked to find the cafe closing. Some offered help, others just stood around awkwardly before leaving. Ethan worked mechanically, wrapping cups, storing coffee beans, dismantling equipment. Lily sat in her usual corner, drawing hearts on napkins until she ran out. Then she just sat, watching her father pack away their life, piece by piece. As evening fell, Ethan sent Lily home with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who promised to give her dinner and put her to bed. Then he sat alone in the darkened cafe, surrounded by boxes and memories. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the floor. 6 years of dreams packed away in cardboard boxes. 6 years of morning rushes, of regular smiles, of Lily growing up among these tables. And more recently, the memory of Grace's laughter, of hope rekindled, of hearts drawn in foam, all gone now. Silent as the empty shop around him. From somewhere nearby, a clock struck 9. In the quiet, Ethan could almost hear the echoes of happier days. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of customers, Lily's giggles, Grace's gentle voice. But now, there was only silence, broken by his ragged breathing as he sat alone in the dark, surrounded by the ruins of his dreams. The morning light filtered through the worn curtains of Ethan's small house, casting a pale glow over the kitchen table where he sat with Lily. Their breakfast was simple, toast and orange juice. No fresh-baked pastries or perfectly crafted coffee drinks anymore. The silence between them felt heavy, broken only by the occasional clink of glasses or scrape of plates. Lily pushed her half-eaten toast around her plate, her usual cheerful chatter absent. Her drawings, usually scattered across every surface, remained tucked away in a box with the rest of their cafe memories. Dark circles under Ethan's eyes revealed sleepless nights spent worrying about their future. Daddy? Lily's small voice cut through the quiet. Are we really not going back to the shop? Ethan's heart clenched. He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. No, sweetheart. Sometimes. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we hope. But what about all our friends? What about... She hesitated, her bottom lip trembling. What about Grace? The mention of Grace's name made Ethan's chest tighten. He'd been avoiding thinking about her, about the way her presence had brought light back into their lives. But that light wasn't meant for people like them. Charles had made that painfully clear. I've been thinking, Ethan said carefully, pushing his own plate away. Maybe we should try somewhere new. A fresh start, just you and me. Lily's eyes widened with alarm. Leave? But this is our home! Before Ethan could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of familiar blonde hair. His stomach dropped. Grace! Lily leaped from her chair, racing to the door before Ethan could stop her. Grace stood on their porch, looking different from her usual polished self. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, clothes that would have shocked her father's social circle. Hi, sweetie, Grace said softly, as Lily wrapped her arms around her waist. She looked past the little girl to Ethan, who remained frozen by the table. "Can we talk?" Ethan wanted to say no, wanted to protect his heart and Lily's from more pain, but he found himself nodding. "Lily, why don't you go finish getting ready for school?" "But, please, sweetheart." Lily's shoulders slumped, but she obeyed, giving Grace one last squeeze before trudging down the hallway. Her bedroom door closed with a soft click. Grace stepped inside, wringing her hands. "I heard from Sarah at the bakery that you're thinking of leaving town." "News travels fast," Ethan said flatly, busying himself with clearing breakfast dishes. "You can't leave." Grace's voice cracked. "Ethan, please. We can figure this out together. The community loves you and Lily. Your cafe means so much to everyone." Ethan set the plates down harder than necessary. "The cafe is gone, Grace. Your father made sure of that. I'll talk to him again. Make him understand." "Understand what?" Ethan turned to face her, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "That his daughter deserves better than a broke single dad who can't even keep his business afloat?" "He's right, Grace. Look at you. You could have anything. Anyone. Why waste your time on someone like me?" Grace crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps, reaching for his hand. "Don't you dare say that. You're not a waste of time. You're kind, and hard-working, and an amazing father. The way you care for people, the way you've created this beautiful space of comfort and connection, that's worth more than all my father's money." Ethan pulled his hand away, though it hurt to do so. "Pretty words don't change reality. I have to think about Lily now. I can't keep dragging her through this fantasy that we could ever fit into your world." "It's not about fitting into my world," Grace's eyes flashed with frustration. "It's about building our own. Together. Why can't you see that?" "Because I've been here before." The words burst out of him. "I've tried to build something lasting, something good. And I lost it all. I can't. I can't do that to Lily again. I can't do it to myself." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "So you're just giving up? Running away?" "I'm being realistic." The sound of small feet made them both turn. Lily stood in the hallway, her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were wide and wet. "Please don't go, Grace," she whispered, dropping her backpack and running to wrap her arms around Grace's legs. "Please stay with us. Daddy smiles when you're here. He makes hearts in the coffee again." Grace knelt down, pulling Lily into a proper hug. Her voice was choked with tears. "Oh, sweetheart." Ethan watched them, his resolve crumbling at the sight of the 2 people he'd grown to care for most in the world, holding each other and crying. But he forced himself to remember Charles's cold office, the devastating loss of his cafe, the whispers around town. "Grace," he said quietly, "please, don't make this harder than it has to be." Grace stood slowly, wiping her eyes. She looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw all the might-have-beens in her gaze. "You're wrong, you know," she said softly, "about deserving better, because there is no one better than you, Ethan Carter. I just wish you could see that." She pressed a kiss to Lily's head, then walked to the door. Her hand lingered on the doorknob. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." The door closed behind her with a gentle click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Lily's small sobs filled the kitchen as Ethan collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The weight of what he was throwing away pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. Through his fingers, he could see the morning sun continuing to rise, indifferent to the hearts breaking in its light. The evening shadows stretched across Lily's bedroom as Ethan went through their familiar bedtime routine. Her room, painted in soft yellow, still had traces of the cafe's warmth. A small chalkboard menu they'd brought home, and paper hearts taped carefully to the walls. Each one was a reminder of what they'd lost. "Time for bed, sweetie," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. He pulled up her favorite unicorn blanket, tucking it around her small shoulders. Lily clutched her stuffed bear closer, her eyes wide, and questioning in the gentle glow of her nightlight. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Why do we make hearts in coffee if they're only meant to break?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He sank down onto the edge of her bed, his hands trembling slightly. How could he explain adult fears and failures to his 7-year-old daughter? The same daughter who'd watched him draw countless hearts in foam, sharing little moments of joy with customers day after day. "Sometimes," he started, then stopped, the words catching in his throat. "You always said hearts mean love," Lily continued, sitting up slightly. "And you made the prettiest heart for Miss Grace. But now, everyone's sad, and the hearts are gone." Her lower lip trembled. "Did the hearts break, Daddy?" Ethan reached out to smooth her hair, buying time to steady his voice. "Hearts are complicated, sweetheart." "No, they're not," Lily said with the absolute certainty of childhood. She leaned over to her bedside table and pulled out a slightly crumpled napkin. On it was one of her drawings, a red heart surrounded by smaller hearts, with "For Daddy and Miss Grace" written in wobbly letters. "Hearts are for sharing, Daddy. You taught me that," she said earnestly, pressing the napkin into his hand. "You share them in coffee to make people happy." "I share them in drawings because I love you." She paused, her small face serious. "And Miss Grace shared her heart with us. Why can't we keep sharing?" Ethan stared at the napkin in his hands, his daughter's innocent wisdom cutting through the layers of fear and doubt he'd built up. Every heart he'd drawn in coffee had been an act of sharing joy, starting with the little designs he made to make Lily smile. When had he started letting fear overshadow that simple truth? "Remember when I was scared of the big slide at the park?" Lily continued, yawning slightly. "You said being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing it anyway." The memory of that day at the park, Lily's triumphant smile after conquering her fear, mixed with images of Grace's first smile over that heart-topped cappuccino. How many moments of joy had he created through those simple foam designs? How many connections had he made, hearts he'd touched? "And Miss Grace makes you smile like Mommy used to," Lily added softly, her eyes starting to droop with sleepiness. "Isn't that worth being brave for?" Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned forward and kissed Lily's forehead, tucking her in again as she drifted toward sleep. "When did you get so wise, little one?" he whispered. "From watching you, Daddy," she murmured, already half asleep. "You always say love is the most important thing." As her breathing evened out into sleep, Ethan remained seated on the edge of her bed, the napkin with its drawn heart still in his hands. The simple red lines seemed to pulse with meaning, each one a reminder of the connections he'd made, the joy he'd shared, the love he'd both given and received. In the quiet of Lily's room, surrounded by paper hearts and childhood wisdom, Ethan found himself staring at that napkin drawing, his daughter's words echoed in his mind. Hearts are for sharing. How had he forgotten something so simple, so fundamental? Each heart he'd drawn in foam had been an act of faith, a small gesture saying love and connection were possible. His fingers traced the childish drawing, feeling a familiar warmth spread through his chest, the same feeling he'd had watching Grace laugh with Lily, the joy of creating something beautiful in a cup of coffee, the pride of building something meaningful with his own 2 hands. It wasn't just about hearts in coffee or a failed business. It was about having the courage to keep sharing your heart, even when you're scared. The napkin trembled slightly in his hands as a flicker of resolve began to return. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe being brave wasn't about not being scared, it was about believing that love was worth the risk. The morning sun filtered through the ornate stained glass windows of the Whitmore Mansion's dining room, casting colorful patterns across the polished mahogany table. Grace stood in the doorway, watching her father methodically cut into his perfectly prepared eggs Benedict. The familiar scene felt foreign now. The excessive formality, the stern silence, the cold precision of it all. Charles looked up from his morning paper, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "You've finally decided to join me for breakfast? I trust you've come to your senses about that coffee shop situation." Grace's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Actually, Dad, I came to talk to you about Ethan." The newspaper crinkled as Charles set it down with deliberate slowness. "I believe that matter is settled. The lease has been terminated, as it should have been." "What you did was cruel," Grace said, moving closer to the table. Ethan built that business from nothing. He works harder than anyone I know." Charles dabbed his mouth with a crisp linen napkin. "Grace, darling, you're being naive. That man was clearly after our money. I did what was necessary to protect you, to protect our family name." "Our family name?" Grace's voice rose. "Is that all you care about? What about happiness? What about love?" "Love?" Charles scoffed, pushing his chair back. "You've known him for what, a few weeks? This isn't one of your romance novels, Grace. This is real life." "Yes, it is real life." Grace planted her hands on the table, leaning forward. "And in real life, I found someone who sees me for who I am, not what I'm worth. Ethan makes me feel alive, Dad. When I'm at that coffee shop, helping him and Lily, I'm not just the Whitmore heiress. I'm me." Charles stood up, his face reddening. "That's exactly the problem. You're throwing away everything we've built for some barista and his kid?" "No, Dad, I'm building something of my own." Grace straightened her spine, meeting his glare. "I love him. And I love Lily. They've shown me what a real family feels like. Warm, supportive, full of actual love instead of expectations." "How dare you!" Charles slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Everything I've done has been for you." "No." Grace's voice was quiet but firm. "Everything you've done has been about control. You tried to buy Ethan off, just like you try to buy everything else. But he has something you can't buy. Integrity. Integrity won't pay the bills, Grace. That man can barely support himself and his daughter. Money isn't everything." Grace's eyes filled with tears of frustration. "You've forgotten that, Dad. You've forgotten what it means to care about someone simply because your heart tells you to." Charles's face hardened. "If you continue with this foolishness, don't expect any support from me. No more allowance, no more credit cards, no more—" "Keep it all." Grace's voice was steady despite her tears. "I don't want your money if it comes with strings attached. I'm done being controlled." She turned toward the door, then paused to look back at her father. His face had gone pale, his usual commanding presence diminished. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes, fear, perhaps, or loneliness. "I love you, Dad," she said softly, "but I won't let you break my heart to protect yours." With those words, Grace strode out of the dining room, her footsteps echoing through the marble hallway. She ignored her father calling after her, ignored the butler's concerned look as she rushed past him. Her hands shook as she grabbed her car keys from the entry table. The drive to Ethan's house was a blur of autumn colors and tears. Grace kept wiping her eyes, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. She'd never stood up to her father like that before. The freedom of it felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The late afternoon sun was sinking toward the horizon when Grace finally pulled up in front of Ethan's modest house. The small yard was neat but simple, with a few weather-worn garden gnomes standing guard near the porch steps. Such a contrast to the manicured perfection of her family's estate, yet it felt more like home than the mansion ever had. She sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the front window she could see warm light spilling out, and the shadow of Ethan moving around inside. This was where she belonged, not in a cold mansion full of empty rooms and emptier conversations. Grace climbed the porch steps, her heart thundering in her chest. The wooden boards creaked beneath her feet, a homey sound that gave her strength. She raised her hand and knocked on the door, praying Ethan would listen. The door opened, and there he stood, his eyes widening in surprise. Before either of them could speak, a blur of movement and pigtails rushed past him. "Grace!" Lily crashed into her legs, wrapping her arms tight around Grace's waist. "You came back?" The little girl's fierce hug broke through the tension like sunshine through storm clouds. Grace knelt down, wrapping her arms around Lily, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and chocolate cookies. "Of course I came back, sweetie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll always come back." The old town hall buzzed with energy as people filed into the high-ceilinged meeting room. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the worn wooden floors and familiar faces of neighbors gathering in clusters. Some sat in the rows of folding chairs while others stood along the walls, their excited whispers filling the space. Grace stood at the front, her usual elegant attire replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged papers on the podium, but her eyes shone with determination. Ethan lingered near the back, holding Lily's hand, trying to blend into the crowd despite being the subject of countless glances and warm smiles. "Thank you all for coming," Grace began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We're here because something special is at risk of being lost. Carter's Coffee isn't just a cafe. It's the heart of our community." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson, who came in every morning for her chamomile tea, nodded vigorously. Mr. Rodriguez, whose construction crew relied on Ethan's strong coffee to start their day, crossed his arms and listened intently. "I propose we save it together," Grace continued, unveiling a large poster board with financial projections and ownership structures. "A community-owned venture where we all have a stake, where the profits go back into making our town better." The room stirred with interest. Tom Baker, the local hardware store owner, raised his hand. "I've got some savings I'd be willing to invest. That place has been my morning stop for 15 years. "My brother's an electrician," called out Sarah from the flower shop. "He'll help with any repairs needed, no charge." One by one, hands shot up across the room. Jenny from the bookstore offered to help with accounting. The high school art teacher volunteered to paint a new mural. Even old Mr. Wilson, known for his frugality, pledged a substantial sum. Ethan stood frozen, overwhelmed by the cascade of support. Lily squeezed his hand, beaming up at him. She had been drawing hearts on a piece of paper and now held it up proudly for everyone to see. Grace's voice wavered with emotion as she documented each offer. "This is exactly what I hoped for. Together, we can make this work." Marcus, the retired banker, stepped forward with reading glasses perched on his nose. "I've looked at the numbers Grace showed me. With the community's investment and proper management, the cafe could thrive. Ethan, you've built something special here. We just need to help it grow." Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out rough with emotion. I don't know what to say. This is more than I deserve." "Nonsense! Mrs. Peterson called out. "Who stayed open during that big storm last winter? Who delivers coffee to the senior center every Sunday? Who remembers everyone's name and story?" "And their kids' names," another voice added. "And their grandkids." The room filled with laughter and more stories. Tales of kindness, of comfort found over a cup of coffee, of a place where everyone felt welcome. Ethan had never realized how deeply his small cafe had woven itself into the fabric of their town. Mayor Thompson stood up from his seat in the front row. "I think we should put it to a vote. All in favor of establishing the Carter's Coffee Community Co-op, raise your hand." A forest of hands shot up, accompanied by cheers and applause. Lily jumped up and down, her paper hearts fluttering. Grace walked through the crowd to stand beside Ethan. Her eyes glistened with happy tears. "See? You're not alone in this. You never were." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures, handshakes, and hugs. People lined up to pledge their support, not just with money, but with time, skills, and encouragement. The town clerk started a waiting list for those wanting to buy shares in the co-op. As the meeting wound down, Ethan found himself standing by the window, watching the autumn leaves dance across the town square. Lily still held his hand, humming happily as she colored another heart. "Daddy," she said, tugging at his sleeve. "Are we staying?" Ethan knelt down beside her, his throat tight with emotion. He looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at the room full of neighbors who had become family. "Maybe we still belong here," he whispered, pulling her close. The sunlight warmed his face as he held his daughter, the sound of community and hope filling the air around them. The town hall continued to buzz with excitement as people discussed plans and possibilities, their voices carrying the promise of new beginnings. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the cafe's windows as Ethan unlocked the front door. The familiar jingle of bells welcomed him, but today felt different. Instead of the usual quiet morning routine, he found Grace already inside, her sleeves rolled up, sorting through paint samples, spread across what used to be his counter. "You're here early," he said, unable to hide his smile. Grace looked up, her face brightening. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited about picking the perfect shade of blue for the walls." The cafe smelled of sawdust and fresh paint rather than coffee beans. Wooden planks leaned against walls, and drop cloths covered the floor. What had been a source of shame just days ago now hummed with possibility. Lily burst through the door, her backpack bouncing. "Can I paint too, Daddy? Please?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Grace answered before Ethan could. "I saved the perfect spot just for your special touch." Throughout the morning, neighbors began trickling in. Mrs. Henderson from the bookstore brought homemade cookies. Tom, the retired carpenter, arrived with his toolbox and decades of expertise. Even teenagers from the high school showed up after classes, eager to help paint. Ethan watched in amazement as his cafe transformed. The walls, once dull and tired, now gleamed with fresh paint in warm, welcoming tones. New shelving went up, crafted by willing hands. The counter, where he'd spent countless hours serving coffee, was being rebuilt wider and more beautiful than before. "Here, try this," Grace said, offering him a bite of a freshly baked cinnamon roll. She'd taken over the small kitchen, testing new recipes. The sweetness melted on his tongue, carrying hints of orange and vanilla he'd never thought to try before. "That's incredible," he admitted. "See?" she grinned, dusting flour from her hands. "Sometimes change is good." Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by art supplies. Her tongue stuck out in concentration as she painted hearts on wooden signs, each one slightly different. Red, pink, purple. Some wobbly, some perfect, all made with love. "Daddy, look." She held up her latest creation. "This one's for the window." Ethan knelt beside her, chest tight with emotion. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you." The days blended together in a whirlwind of activity. Each morning brought new progress, new faces, new hope. Grace seemed to be everywhere at once, directing volunteers, arranging furniture, testing equipment. She moved through the space as if she'd always belonged there, and maybe she had. One afternoon, while taking a break, Ethan found her standing alone in the storage room, running her fingers along the newly installed shelves. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked softly. She turned, eyes shining. "I was just thinking about that first heart you drew in my coffee. How something so simple changed everything." He stepped closer, taking her flour-dusted hand in his. "I was so afraid of change back then, of letting anyone in. And now I'm starting to believe in hearts again." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of Lily's giggling. She stood in the doorway with Tom, both of them holding paintbrushes like magic wands. "We need help with the trim," Lily announced importantly. "Grace, you promised to show me how to paint straight lines." Grace squeezed Ethan's hand before following Lily. "Duty calls!" The week flew by in a blur of paint fumes, power tools, and shared meals. The community brought food every day: casseroles, sandwiches, fresh fruit. They ate together on breaks, sharing stories and dreams for the cafe's future. Finally, as the sun began to set on the last day of renovation, they gathered outside. The new wooden sign waited, covered in a sheet, ready to be unveiled. The crowd of helpers hushed as Ethan stepped forward with Lily. "Ready?" he asked his daughter. She nodded eagerly, and together they pulled the sheet away. There it hung, beautiful in its simplicity, the Heart Café, in warm cherry wood with one of Lily's perfectly imperfect hearts painted beside it. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes as he stared up at the sign. It represented more than just a business. It was proof that love could rebuild what fear had broken. He felt Grace's hand slip into his, and Lily's arms wrap around his waist. "It's perfect," Grace whispered. And standing there, surrounded by the people who had helped him believe in second chances, Ethan knew she was right. His cafe wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to all of them, a testament to the power of community and the courage to open one's heart again. The new sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, its fresh paint catching the last golden rays of sunlight. Below it, the windows gleamed, Lily's painted hearts creating a border that seemed to pulse with life and promise. The morning sun bathed Main Street in golden light as Ethan stood outside the Heart Café, taking in the festive scene before him. Red and white balloons bobbed gently in the autumn breeze, while hand-painted banners stretched across the storefront proclaimed, "Grand reopening today." The sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls mingled with the rich scent of freshly ground coffee beans wafting through the open door. Inside, Grace moved with practiced ease behind the counter, arranging fresh pastries in the display case. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon that matched the cafe's new color scheme. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at Ethan through the window and smile, making his heart skip a beat. Lily darted between tables, carefully placing handmade paper hearts at each setting. She'd spent hours creating them, insisting that every customer needed their own special welcome. Her small fingers smoothed each napkin with determined precision, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Everything looks perfect, sweetheart," Ethan called to her, and she beamed back at him. "The hearts have to be just right, Daddy," she replied seriously. "It's our special day." The sidewalk began filling with townspeople, their excited chatter growing louder as 9 a.m. approached. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop had brought fresh bouquets for each table. Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the hardware store, stood proudly next to the new wooden sign he'd helped craft. Even Mayor Thompson had arrived early, wearing his formal suit for the occasion. Grace emerged from the cafe, carrying a large pair of scissors tied with a red ribbon. "Are you ready?" she asked Ethan softly, touching his arm. He looked at her, remembering the journey that had brought them here, from that first heart drawn in coffee foam to the lowest moment when he'd nearly lost everything. Now, surrounded by the people who'd helped rebuild his dream, Ethan felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "More than ready," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. The crowd had swelled to fill the sidewalk and spill into the street. Neighbors who'd contributed to the community fund stood shoulder to shoulder with regular customers who'd supported the cafe for years. Someone started a countdown as Mayor Thompson stepped forward with the ceremonial ribbon. 10, 9, 8. Lily bounced excitedly beside them, clutching her basket of paper hearts. 7, 6, 5. Grace's fingers found Ethan's, squeezing gently. 4, 3, 2, 1. The scissors flashed in the morning sun as Grace cut through the ribbon. Cheers erupted from the crowd, accompanied by whistles and applause. Lily threw her handful of paper hearts into the air, and they fluttered down like confetti. "Welcome to the Heart Cafe," Grace announced, her voice carrying over the celebration. The doors opened wide, and people began streaming in, filling the space with laughter and warmth. The newly painted walls gleamed, and sunlight sparkled off the polished coffee machines. Every table was quickly occupied, creating a buzz of excitement Ethan had never experienced in the old cafe. Behind the counter, Ethan fell into an easy rhythm with Grace. She took orders while he crafted drinks, their movements synchronized as if they'd been working together for years. Each cappuccino he served featured his signature heart design, but today they seemed to hold extra meaning. "Just like the first one you made me," Grace whispered, as she passed him another order, her eyes twinkling. Lily wove through the tables, distributing her paper hearts and chatting with customers. Her innocent joy was contagious, and even the most serious faces softened when she approached. She'd stop occasionally to watch Ethan work, pride shining in her eyes as people praised his coffee art. The morning flew by in a blur of activity. Regular customers mixed with newcomers, sharing stories about how the cafe had brought the community together. Mrs. Henderson wiped away tears as she described how her late husband had loved coming here for his morning coffee. Mr. Rodriguez loudly proclaimed that the new wooden fixtures would last 100 years. During a brief lull, Ethan glanced out the front window and froze. There, across the street, stood Charles Whitmore. He wore his usual expensive suit, but his normally rigid posture seemed uncertain. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a moment, neither man moved. Grace hadn't noticed her father yet. She was busy showing Lily how to arrange cookies on a serving plate, both of them giggling as they worked. The sight seemed to catch Charles's attention, and something shifted in his expression. Ethan watched as Charles observed the scene before him. His daughter, happier than she'd ever been in their mansion, teaching a little girl while wearing an apron dusted with flour. The successful businesswoman, who'd chosen love over luxury. The father in Ethan recognized the conflict in Charles's eyes. The struggle between protecting your child and letting them find their own path. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Charles's hand twitched, as if he might wave or step forward, but he remained rooted to his spot across the street. Grace chose that moment to look up, her smile faltering slightly as she noticed her father. She straightened, unconsciously pulling Lily closer to her side. But instead of tension, her posture held quiet confidence. She was exactly where she wanted to be. "Another rush coming in," she called to Ethan, turning back to their customers with practiced ease. Her hand slipped into his as she passed, a gesture of unity and strength. Ethan squeezed her hand, then reached for the coffee grinder. The familiar sound filled the air as a new group of customers entered, the bells chiming welcome. Through the window, Charles still stood watching, his expression unreadable but somehow softer than before. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe's newly cleaned windows, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floors. The Heart Cafe buzzed with activity locals chatting over steaming mugs, the espresso machine hissing rhythmically, and Lily's cheerful voice as she handed out her signature heart-decorated napkins to customers. The bell above the door chimed. Charles Whitmore's commanding figure appeared in the doorway, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the cafe's cozy atmosphere. The normal chatter died away as heads turned. Even the espresso machine seemed to quiet down. Ethan stood frozen behind the counter, a coffee pot suspended mid-pour. Grace, who had been arranging muffins in the display case, straightened up slowly. Lily, sensing the tension, clutched her stack of napkins closer to her chest. Charles cleared his throat, his usual stern expression wavering. He took a few careful steps into the cafe, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The silence grew heavier with each step. "I suppose," Charles began, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I owe everyone here an apology." His eyes swept across the room before settling on Ethan. "Especially you." Grace moved closer to Ethan, her hand finding his arm. Charles noticed the gesture, and something in his face softened. "When my daughter first told me about this place," Charles continued, "about you, I saw it as a threat." He paused, adjusting his tie, a nervous gesture that made him seem suddenly human. "I've spent my life building wealth, security for my family. I thought that meant controlling everything, including Grace's future." A few customers nodded in understanding. Mrs. Peterson, a regular who'd been coming to the cafe for years, dabbed at her eyes with one of Lily's heart napkins. But looking around today, Charles gestured to the renovated space. "Seeing what this community built together, what you built, Mr. Carter, I realize I was wrong." His voice grew quieter, more personal. "I saw the way my daughter lights up when she's here. The way this place has become more than just a cafe." Lily, who had been inching closer during Charles's speech, now stood near her father. Charles looked down at her, and his stern facade cracked further. "The heart's in the coffee," he said, almost to himself. "Grace told me how it started something you did to make your daughter smile after losing her mother." He met Ethan's eyes. "That's the kind of man you are. The kind who builds happiness from loss. The kind who turns simple coffee into something meaningful." Grace's eyes glistened with tears. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he set down the coffee pot. "I was cruel," Charles admitted. "I tried to solve this with money, because that's all I knew. But you showed me something different. You showed me that real worth isn't in a bank account, it's in how many hearts you touch." He glanced meaningfully at Lily's napkins. Quite literally, in this case. A few chuckles broke the tension. Ethan stepped out from behind the counter, approaching Charles slowly. "I'm not here to offer money this time," Charles said, extending his hand. "I'm here to offer something I should have given from the start: acceptance, and my sincere apology." Ethan looked at the offered hand for a moment. He thought about all the sleepless nights, the worry about losing his business, the fear of not being enough. But he also thought about Grace's unwavering faith in him, Lily's innocent wisdom about sharing hearts, and the community that had rallied around them. He took Charles's hand and shook it firmly. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Grace rushed forward, throwing her arms around her father. Charles stiffened for a moment before melting into the embrace, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. "Thank you, Daddy," Grace whispered, pulling back to smile at him through her tears. Lily tugged at Charles's suit jacket, holding up one of her special napkins. "Would you like a heart, Mr. Whitmore?" Charles knelt down to her level, accepting the napkin with surprising gentleness. "I would be honored, young lady." The cafe erupted in applause, the tension dissolving into joy. Grace moved to hug Ethan, while Lily beamed between them all. The usual chatter resumed, perhaps even louder and more cheerful than before. Mrs. Peterson wiped away more tears, declaring it was time for another round of coffee for everyone. The espresso machine whirred back to life, and Ethan returned to his place behind the counter, his movements more confident than ever. Charles settled into a chair by the window, carefully smoothing Lily's heart napkin on the table. Grace brought him a cappuccino, complete with a perfectly drawn heart in the foam. The afternoon sun caught the steam rising from the cup, creating a gentle halo of light that seemed to embrace them all. The Heart Cafe hummed with renewed energy, a symphony of clinking cups, gentle laughter, and the unmistakable sound of healing. In that moment, it was more than just a coffee shop, it was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the simple magic of hearts drawn in coffee foam. The evening light faded outside the Heart Cafe's windows, painting the sky in soft purples and oranges. Inside, the warmth of the day's celebrations still lingered in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries. Ethan locked the front door, flipping the "closed" sign with a contented sigh. The quiet that settled over the space felt different now, peaceful rather than lonely. Grace sat at their favorite corner table, helping Lily arrange her colored pencils. The little girl's hair was slightly messy from the day's excitement, but her eyes sparkled with joy as she started drawing on one of her signature paper napkins. The sight made Ethan's heart swell. "What are you creating there, sweetheart?" Grace asked, leaning over to watch Lily work. "A special heart," Lily replied, her tongue poking out in concentration. "For Daddy's special coffee." Ethan smiled, running his hand along the newly polished counter as he walked behind it. Everything felt both familiar and new, the same beloved equipment now housed in a space that the whole community had helped transform. The walls, freshly painted in warm cream, displayed local artwork, including several of Lily's framed heart drawings. "One last coffee for the day?" he called out to Grace, already reaching for her favorite cup. "Always," she answered, her eyes meeting his with that spark that still made his heart skip a beat. As he worked the espresso machine, muscle memory guiding his movements, Ethan thought about how far they'd come. Just weeks ago, he'd been ready to give up everything, his dreams, his home, and even the chance at love. Now, watching Grace and Lily giggle together over whatever masterpiece was taking shape on that napkin, he wondered how he could have ever considered walking away. The milk steamed and swirled as he prepared it, just the right temperature and texture. He'd made thousands of hearts in coffee foam over the years, first as silly drawings for Lily, then as an accidental gesture that changed his life when Grace walked in. But this one had to be perfect. "Done!" Lily announced, holding up her napkin art proudly. She'd drawn 3 figures holding hands, surrounded by hearts of various sizes. "It's us!" Grace hugged her close. "It's beautiful, sweetie. You know what? I think I'll keep this one forever." "Forever?" Lily's eyes widened. "Like you're staying with us forever?" The question hung in the air, simple but profound. Ethan's hands stilled over the coffee cup as he listened for Grace's response. "Yes," Grace said softly, but with certainty. "If that's okay with you," Lily launched herself into Grace's arms, nearly knocking over the colored pencils. "Yes, yes, yes." Ethan watched them embrace, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the steam from the espresso machine. He focused on finishing the coffee, carefully pouring the milk to create the most perfect heart he'd ever attempted. The foam settled exactly as he hoped, forming a delicate pattern that seemed to glow in the cafe's soft lighting. Walking over to their table, he set the cup down in front of Grace. The heart design rippled slightly with the movement, but held its shape strong and true, just like their love. "This one's forever," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Grace looked up at him, her eyes shining with happy tears. She reached for the cup, but instead of drinking immediately, she just held it, admiring the artistry and meaning in that simple heart. "Remember the first one you made me?" she asked, smiling. "I thought it was just a cute design, but something about it made me want to come back." "I remember thinking you were way too fancy for my little shop," Ethan admitted, pulling up a chair to join them. "I never imagined that I'd help serve coffee and wash dishes?" Grace laughed. "Dad certainly never imagined that either." "Grandpa Charles likes the hearts now too," Lily chimed in, already starting on another drawing. "He said so today." Ethan nodded, still amazed by how things had changed. Charles Whitmore's transformation from opponent to supporter hadn't been instant, but it had been genuine. The memory of their handshake earlier that day felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Grace finally lifted the cup to her lips, taking a careful sip of the coffee. Her eyes closed in appreciation. "Still, the best in town, the best in the whole world," Lily corrected seriously, making both adults laugh. The cafe's interior glowed softly around them, the newly installed pendant lights casting a gentle warmth over the scene. Through the windows, Ethan could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. The sight reminded him of that night at the fall festival, dancing with Grace under the twinkling lights, when everything had seemed perfect just before it all fell apart. But now, sitting here with his daughter and the woman he loved, surrounded by the evidence of their community's support and care, he understood that perfect moments weren't about everything going right. They were about finding peace, even after things went wrong. Lily yawned, curling up against Grace's side with her colored pencils forgotten on the table. Grace stroked the little girl's hair with one hand while holding her coffee with the other, and Ethan felt the last pieces of his world settle perfectly into place. Here, in their corner of the Heart Cafe, they had everything they needed. Love drawn in coffee foam and on paper napkins. Support built into the very walls around them. And most importantly, 3 hearts that had found their way to each other, beating in sync as the evening wrapped them in its gentle embrace. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.